because you talked about all these core tenets that people will need to be successful in the 21st century. And more specifically, I wanted to start off with, you mentioned what it took you to be successful in your career is very different than what it will take next generations to be successful. There are different principles that you have to follow. And I loved how you framed your points around those principles that other people will need to be successful. And I wanted to start off with that point. Why is it different fundamentally from your time to right now for somebody?
I think that's a superb place to start, Arman, because look, the 21st century that we're in is not going to be anything like the 20th. So essentially in the last century after the Second World War, we had about 50 years of relative stability. And my parents' generation, my generation, I grew up in a time when the world was stable, predictable, and also we had some enormous sort of rising tides that lifted all our lives. So, for instance, we had globalization as India and China got connected to the rest of the world from a trade and people flow, talent flow, that essentially made my life what it is. I went to America to study and I started working there. And I was able to go back and forth, work and live in Europe. And so that was a very, very powerful thing. Then we had the rise of the internet. Mm-hmm. And that was, again, another giant tide that lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty into the middle class and a few into the ranks of the affluent. The 21st century appears to be, way more turbulent, way more chaotic, way more unpredictable. And the sort of name of the game is change. Mm-hmm. So the world will change more in this 100 years, the 21st century, than in all of human history. And that's driven by a set of forces, for instance, technology. And, we all know what things like AI are beginning to do and automation. The impact of all of us humans on the planet and the way that's blowing back in the form of climate change and, all kinds of environmental degradation and so forth is impacting lives in a very real way. The fact that more and more of us are living much longer, and the first person who's going to live to be 150 has probably been born.
Right.
So there are great consequences that most people don't think about in terms of what this much longer lifespan means to each of us and all of us. And so what this is resulting in a world which people often use the word VUCA to describe. VUCA stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Okay. And it's actually a term that the US Army coined in the 50s to describe the conditions on a battlefield, okay, which is completely chaotic, the fog of war, where the lines of communication are disrupted, and you as a soldier have to figure out what to do to stay alive. So the conditions on a battlefield are not very different from what it seems to be for a lot of us right now.
Right.
And therefore, the prescription for success that works so well for me and a lot of my friends, and maybe the next generation, will certainly not be particularly relevant here. In my time, all you had to do was, get a reasonable education, get some good marks, that landed you a good job. You kept your head low and tried to not piss off your boss or anybody around. And if you did that, you would have a reasonable run. You may change a couple of jobs, and then you could look forward to a reasonable retirement. I mean, that is so not going to happen for most people right now. Uh-huh. So what you need to do today is very different. And by and large, you have to be much more entrepreneurial, much more of a risk taker. And you have to take charge of your life, because if you don't, nobody else will.
Subscribe for more of this good stuff. See y'all in the next one.